Hello guys, my name is Mark Hernandez. I am a ASU intern, currently on the road to become a registered dietitian. I'm currently in my rotation with the Levine School District, and today I'm here to just talk a little bit about some things to keep in mind, some important points to keep in mind when we are handling food, ordering food, or even just preparing a plate for a child that has a food allergy. To do this, I'm going to start by discussing what the difference is between a food allergy and food intolerance. Then we'll get to those points, those best practices to keep in mind when we're handling the kiddo's food. Let's start off with the difference between a food intolerance and a food allergy. Let's start off with food intolerance. So when someone has an intolerance to a food, that just simply means that their body is not able to fully metabolize or break down that food. An easy example would be a lactose intolerant, right? So, as we know, lactose is in milk. It's a sugar that's in milk. People that are have an intolerance to lactose aren't able to break it down. So what happens is that unbroken down milk sugar gets into the GI system and it starts attracting a lot of water, which could cause a lot of side effects, unfortunately. Cramping, bloating, sweating, and of course, gas, diarrhea. Sometimes all at once. This reaction could be anywhere from minutes to hours before those symptoms occur. Now, another thing that's unique to lactose intolerance or an intolerance is that the degree of intolerance can vary from person to person. So, two people are both lactose intolerant. One may be able to drink maybe 2 ounces, 4 ounces of milk and be okay, or they may be able to eat cheese on a pizza and they'll be fine. But they aren't able to drink 8 ounces of milk because that's when they'll start getting those symptoms. Then there's somebody else that might not be able to have any lactose. They can't tolerate any lactose at all. So that's kind of, you could see it varies from person to person as well. Like I said before, it could take minutes to hours for these reactions to happen. Again, that could vary from person to person. So, and also that's usually not life-threatening. But even though it's not life-threatening to have, like, let's say, a lactose intolerance, we've all been in school. We know that if a kiddo, if there's some kind of oversight, we give a kiddo milk with lactose and we just either forgot or just, like I said, there was a simple oversight. Sometimes these kids aren't at the age where they're able to tell this is the food you are able to eat and not to eat. So they might consume the food, develop those symptoms in a classroom setting. And we could see, even though it doesn't necessarily affects their health, it could affect their social health. We know how kids are, and if we get these symptoms in class, we might end up with some nicknames that we don't want. And even though the symptoms of lactose intolerance might only last a couple hours, the damage to their social structure or their friends group can last a long time if these kiddos happen to go through that in that setting. So something to keep in mind. Even though it's not harming them per se, it could have lasting effects. And their kids are there to learn and to make friends, and they don't want to end up with these nicknames and make school stressful, more stressful than it already is. Now, how is that different from a food allergy? So, recapping real quick. An intolerance is the unable to break a food down, unable to metabolize it, which causes some GI distress. Now, an allergy is the body recognizing a protein as a foreign object. So something that's not supposed to be there, which causes all these reactions that can be life-threatening. Could make it very difficult for the child to breathe, swelling, hives, and unlike lactose or intolerance, that could those effects could happen, minutes to hours before you see symptoms. With an allergy, those could happen in seconds to minutes. And again, those being like anaphylaxis, being difficult to breathe, hives. It's an autoimmune reaction. So the body actually starts attacking itself because this protein that has been introduced to the body just starts attacking it, starts freaking out. A way to think about it is a little match, right? A little lit match, and throwing that little lit match into a forest of dry grass. Even though it's this little thing, it could cause a very fast, dramatic reaction. So that's something to always keep in mind, especially when we get to the other tips of when we're handling the food. And again, comparing it back to an intolerance where the tolerance of the food varies from person to person, and the amount, right? Somebody might be able to drink a little bit more milk than someone else. Well, with an allergy, it's the smallest amount. Like I said, the smallest little match can start a great big reaction. And even though one is more severe than the other, again, we want to take both of them very seriously because parents are trusting us to feed their children. And even though whether it's their health or their social health as well, they're trusting us, so we need to take both very seriously. So now that we know the difference between an intolerance and an allergy, let's talk about when we're handling food for these kiddos. So let's start off with in the very beginning, right? So we walk in, first thing we do is we wash our hands. So there are different tools we utilize in order to keep our kiddos safe. Soap and water to wash our hands. There's also sanitizer, and then there's gloves as well. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between washing your hands and sanitizing your hands. Both important, but they serve different, separate purposes, right? So as we know, hand sanitizer kills anywhere from 98 to 99% of bacteria on the hands. And just a quick question to kind of see how these things are different. So we know sanitizer kills bacteria, a lot of it, on the hands. How much bacteria or virus does soap or washing your hands kill? Well, the answer is 0. So washing your hands does not kill any living organisms on your hands, right? That's what sanitizer's for. But what soap does do is it's able to get things off of your hands. And since we're talking about allergies here, that's what we want to do. We want to get these proteins that kids are allergic to off our hands and nowhere close to their foods or utensils. So an easy way to remember, sanitizer kills things that are on your hands, where soap gets things off, right? Soap is like making a slip and slide for these things you don't want on your hands, and that foaming action, that lathering action is actually a very crucial and important step in that. And that's why there's those steps of washing your hands for 20 seconds to make sure to lather, because you're encapsulating all these dirt and bacteria and viruses and proteins that are in your hands, so you're able to get them off. And then of course sanitizing kills, and then you could put on your gloves to handle the food at that point. So now that we know the difference between washing your hands and sanitizing, let's move on to getting our food, right? So let's say we received a shipment of food, and it's not the food we usually get. For an easy example, let's say you received a tater tot, but it's not the usual tater tot you're used to. But hey, a potato's a potato, right? Well, it's not. So if that ever happens, you got to keep in mind, if it's a new item, especially when if you have kids that have allergies, you want to check those ingredients. And before you use that item, best practice is to call the registered dietitian on your team, take a picture of that food item and call them, and you guys could work out to see if that food item is able to be used. But always utilize your registered dietitian on your team, okay? Another thing you're gonna want to do, let's say you talked to the registered dietitian, hey, this tater tot actually uses soybean oil instead of the one we usually have with corn oil. So that soybean oil, you might have some kiddos that are allergic to soy, so that's a very important thing to know. So you guys work that out, and now you are preparing lunch for your for the kiddo that has an allergy, and you accidentally use that tater tot with soy. So there are a couple ways to handle this. One is, of course, throwing the plate away, the whole thing. The reason being is you can't just take off that tater tot and then put that other tater tot that doesn't have soy. Because remember that match in the forest example I made? So any little bit of oil, any little bit of that soy protein that's on that plate still there, even though you threw away the tater tots, that's cross contact can still cause an issue. It can still be that little match that causes a big reaction. So throwing it away, washing your hands, and putting new gloves on, and then serving that child the right food that does not have soy. Another thing you could do is give that plate to a child that does not have that allergy. But again, after that, you're gonna want to wash your hands, wash the area that soy protein was introduced to, and make that child a plate that there's no cross contact, your hands are washed, there's new gloves, the surface and utensils you're using were not used previously. And before we even got to that point, one thing that we should do, the very first thing we do before prepping a meal for a special diet student, is look at the nutrition facts, look at the ingredients to make sure that there is no allergens present. Some people might think, oh, well, there's a website, the NutriSlice web page, where all the ingredients are listed on this food item, but we don't want to rely on NutriSlice because NutriSlice is not always up to date. So let's say that Shamrock or a different supplier changed an ingredient, right? Let's say they use soy oil now instead of corn oil for some odd reason. Well, they don't call each school, they don't call each dietitian on the team and tell them, hey, we made this change, so update your system. What they do is update their ingredients list, update what's on the package. So you have to go off what's on the package. That's going to be the most up-to-date information, and it's going to make sure it's going to be a safer bet than trying to go off a website that might not be updated right away. And of course, if you are not sure, contact the registered dietitian on the team. All right, guys, so we talked about what's the difference between a food allergy and a food intolerance. We talked about the difference between sanitizing and washing your hands, best practicing when handling foods with allergens in them, when receiving new food items that you're not sure about, and also when the first step when you receive an item is to go off what's on the package and not on what's on NutriSlice. If you guys have any other questions, you could contact your registered dietitian on your team. Also have the special diets binder to refer back to that has a lot of the same information we talked about today. Gets a little bit more in depth. It also has all the contact information you would need of who you need to contact and when. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys stay safe. Thank you.